everyone. We are the Group 6 and our report is about traditional literature. So I am Irijoy C. Salem together with my group mates Miss Raymaro, Miss Reyes, Miss Roquero, Miss Salavarria, and Miss Samiana. So before we start our report, we will have a very short activity which will present the 4 picks together with Scramble Birds. So you can answer by raising your hand or pressing the raise hand button in Gmeet, and I will call the first one who raised their hand. Are you ready, guys? So let's play. Anyone who wants to answer this? Yes, Miss De La Rosa.
It's epic.
Correct. It is epic. So here's the second one. Yes, Miss Bergonia.
I think it's meat.
Correct. It is meat. Yes, Mr. Suarez.
It's fables.
Correct. It is fables. Here's the fourth one. Yes, Miss Bergonia.
I think it's mocktails.
Yes, correct. Here's the last one. Anyone? Yes, Miss Tagsim.
Is it legendary?
Correct. It is legendary. So thank you for participating. So to formally start our report, here's our lesson objectives. The number 1 is compare and contrast the different traditional literature. Know the meaning of different types of traditional literature and appreciate the importance of traditional literature. So what is traditional literature? So according to Kiefer 2007, traditional literature encompasses books rendered from oral tradition, stories that have been passed down for ages, and as a result are commonly shared throughout the world. This literature includes folktales, myths, fables, epics, and legends. So traditional literature is a literature that has no known author, and stories have been handed down orally from one generation to the next, which is storyteller is adding slight variations. So traditional literature is orally passed down through generations. So it's possible that some information might be altered. Like for example, is the name of Cinderella is not really in some other version. Her name is Zezola or Centrillion, but I think the main theme or the main story is still the same. So these stories often tell of cultures, costume, values, and beliefs. They were used to teach children important lessons in life and prepare them for society. Later, the stories were written down. So first, it came from oral. Now, then the time passed by, it will now written. So I will tell you the characteristic of traditional literature. It is based in oral traditional with no known author, anytime and any place. For example, of this is once upon a time in a place far away. The third one is common ending, which is we're all familiar, which is they live happily ever after. And often magical. Typically, evil is defeated and hero or heroine triumphs. Contain universal truths and values of time, were sometimes used to interact children and values. So what is the purpose of traditional literature? The purpose of traditional literature is that which has been passed from one generation to the next. It can provide readers with insight into the world, various cultures. Its main purpose is to provide entertainment. However, important themes often exist within traditional literature. This might include foolishness, emotional outlets, and cultural values, to name a few. So, the main purpose of traditional literature is, of course, to bring entertainment to the children or anyone who listening to the oral stories. But of course, it also bring lessons to others, especially to the children. And so, how the stories in traditional literature are relatable to anyone? So, most of the traditional literature actually are using universal theme. So, what is the universal theme? Universal theme, it is the theme that you will madalas na mapapansin in traditional stories. I prefer the four common type of universal theme. The first one is rich versus poor, which is, I know you're all familiar in this kind of theme. It is a conflict struggles between wealthy people and poor people. The second one is strong versus weak. It is a conflict or struggles between strong and weak people. Madalas in the story, you will see obviously the strong is having malalaking physical compared dun sa mga weak na people. The third one is ugly versus pretty, emphasizing the struggle between beautiful and ugly. I know, familiar sa the Snow White, diba? It emphasized the conflict between of the stepmother and the beautiful Snow White. Lastly, the good versus evil. It is a struggle between good and bad. I think it is the most common universal theme that you will find in traditional literature because it has very good lessons that will bring in children or whoever listening to the stories from traditional literature. So, here's the different types of traditional literature that will be further discussed by my group mates. May I call Ms. Roquero to start it. Thank you.
All right. So thank you for that, Miss Iras. So now let us talk about mythology. So first, let us know what is mythology. So next slide, please. So all right. So mythology is a body or collection of myths belonging to a people and addressing their origin, history, deities, ancestors, and heroes. So, myth is a traditional or frequently ancient story about supernatural beings, ancestors, or heroes that acts as a fundamental type in the worldview of people by describing the psychology, customs, or ideals of society, or by elucidating certain parts of the natural world. So, myth is often used to refer to stories in which God, goddesses, and pagan divinities play a part. And myth serve as an explanation for concepts in pre-scientific science. And as long as the divinity of its character is recognized, a myth will continue to exist. And it is also associated to religious and beliefs. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so let us move on to the evolution of mythology. So the first one is Euhemerus. So Euhemerus, also spelled Eumerus or Bemerus, is the author of utopian work that was popular in Asian world. So his name was given to the theory that gods are great men worship after their death, or that is the Euhemerism. So Euhemerism is an interpretation of myths as traditional accounts of historical persons and events. And it is defined as the theory of the Greek writer Euhemerus that the Greek gods were created from real stories about humans and historical events. So next slide, please. So now let us move on to the second one. So a second theory was put out by philologists, or those who research the development of language. So according to this study, when people repeated what their ancestors had said, they perceived it in a different way, and as a result, myths are created. Okay, so next slide, please. So next is anthropologist, or person who studied the history of human race, came up with a third theory. So anthropology is the study of what makes us human, and anthropologists take a broad approach to understanding the many different aspects of the human experience. So in this theory, they made an effort to identify the origin of natural phenomena. So next is yeah. So for the first theory put out by sociologist Emil Durkheim, myths originated from society as a whole. So Durkheim argued that cultural representation play an important role in societies, and that human beings have a dual role. Like we are in societies and societies are in us. And especially, I would argue in the form of myths that we learn as we grow up. And he believed that the society exerted a powerful force on individuals, and according to him, people's norms, beliefs, and values make up a collective consciousness, or a shared way of understanding and behaving in the world. So, the collective consciousness binds individuals together and creates a social integration. Thank you. All right, so let us move on to the source of mythology, Greek and Roman myths. So we have here the name of God and goddesses in mythology, Greek and Roman myths. So we have here the name of Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Aphrodite, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hermes, and Heracles. So next slide, please. Okay, so first let's talk about Zeus. So the first one is Zeus, king of the gods, or his Roman equivalent is Jupiter. So Zeus is the god of the sky in ancient Greek mythology, and as the chief Greek deity, Zeus is considered the ruler, protector, and father of all gods and humans. So the next one is Hera. So Hera is the daughter of Cronus, and Rhea, which is the mother of Zeus, was associated with all aspects of the life of women. So Hera is the goddess of women, marriage, and childbirth. She was known by the Romans as Juno. Okay, next is Poseidon. So in Greek mythology, Poseidon, or in Neptune, in Roman mythology, he called as Neptune. So he was the son of the Titans giants Cronus and Rhea, and the brother of the supreme god Zeus. So Poseidon's attribute is a trident. So with it, he could steer the waters and split rocks. Next is Aphrodite. So worship of Aphrodite continued throughout the Roman period. So she was also known as Venus. She came to symbolize Rome's imperial power. Like her Greek counterpart, Aphrodite, or Venus, was intimately associated with love and beauty. So yet other elements were distinctive to the Roman goddess. So next slide, please. Okay, so the next one is Athena, or Minerva. So originally, Minerva was an Italian goddess of handicrafts, closely associated to the Greek goddess Athena. So Minerva was indigenous, passing to the Romans from Etruscan goddess Minerva. So that her name derives from Miminis, meaning to remember. The next one is Apollo. So Apollo is one of the Olympian deities in classical Greek and Roman religion, in Greek and Roman mythology. So the national divinity of the Greeks, Apollo, has been recognized as a god of archery, music and dance, truth and prophecy, healing and diseases, the sun and light, poetry, and more. So the next is Artemis. So Artemis in Greek religion, the goddess of wild animals, the hunt and vegetation, and of chastity and childbirth. She was identified by the Romans with Diana. Okay, so Artemis was the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and the twin sister of Apollo. So among the rural populace, Artemis was the favorite goddess. The next one is Ares. Okay, so Ares was the ancient Greek god of war, or more properly, the spirit of battle. So he represented the distasteful aspect of brutal warfare and slaughter. So Eros was never very popular and his worship was not extensive in Greece. Next slide, please. All right, so Hermes, the Greek god Hermes, or in Roman mythology is Mercury, was the god of translators and interpreters. So he was the most clever of the Olympian gods and served as messenger for all other gods. So he ruled over wealth, good fortune, commerce, fertility, and thievery. So the last one is Heracles. So Hercules is the Roman equivalent of the Greek divine hero Heracles, and son of the Jupiter and the mortal Athene. So in classical mythology, Hercules is famous for his strength and for his numerous far-ranging adventures. So next slide, please. All right, so let us move on to the types of myth stories. So the first one is the white story, also known as Pukwa or Pukwa tales. Pukwa tales are the most basic kind of myths. An illustration of this kind of story is why the sunflower turns to the sun. So Pukwa is the French word for why. Okay, so a Pukwa tale is a narrative that explains the origin of something. So how did the tiger get his stripes? Why are the sun and moon in the sky? Why does an elephant has such big ear? Something like that. So Pukwa tales are common across most cultures, and if you read a lot of folk tales, you will become familiar with many different Pukwa stories. Okay, the second one is the allegory or symbolic story. Is the second type of myth. The story of King Midas is suitable story for children. So the story of King Midas is indeed an excellent story with a beautiful moral that should be narrated to children of all ages. It teaches them about the dangers of being greedy and how one should be content with what one has. So the story about King Midas explains to us the dangers of being greedy, like what I have said before. So we should be happy and content with all we have to live a peaceful and happy life. So the moral of King Midas' story is that one should never be greedy in life because the wish of being greedy does not give fruitful returns in the future. Okay, so for the last one is the natural world and other often mysterious phenomena are the focus of another type of myth story. Next slide. So we're now here in the values of myth. So the first one is myths have a dramatic quality that captures the attention, imagination of poets and children. Next is there are several poems in English that contains classic myths. The third one is Greek and Roman myths provide the basis for sculpture and graphic art. Next is they serve as the background for all nations' great national epics. They also help to clarify the meaning and origin of several commonly used words, and also they aid in understanding literature and the arts. They enhance our understanding of the physical world, the history and civilization of the eras from which the stories emerge, as well as human race. And for the last is children frequently ask how, when, and why questions about how animals, birds, insects, trees, flowers, and other creatures of nature act. So myths provide answer to these questions. But myths are more than mere stories, and they serve a more profound purpose in ancient and modern cultures. So myths are sacred tales that explains the world and man's experience. So myths are as relevant to us today as they were to the ancient era. So myths answer timeless questions and serve as a compass to each generation. Alright, so that's all for my part. Let's move on to the next reporter, which is Miss Reyes.
Thank you for that, Miss Roquero. Next slide, please. I'm Maria Gabriel Jurias, the one who assigned to present the fables, one of the types of traditional literature. So what is fable? Fables is a fictitious story about an animal or an inanimate object which behaves like a human being and has dominant trait. It is meant to teach a lesson or moral. A fable is a short tale in which the chief characters are animals and sometimes inanimate objects. The wisdom of the foolish acts or actions of human beings are shown by the actions and words of the beast. The fables must always have a theme or moral that appears at the end of the story. The Western tradition of fable effectively begins with Aesop, a likely legendary figure to whom is attributed a collection of ancient Greek fables. Modern editions contain up to 200 fables, but there is no way of tracing their actual origins. The earliest known collection linked to Aesop dates to the 4th century BCE. Next slide, please. Sources of fables. So, who are the sources of fables? There are three sources of fables. Next slide, please. First is Aesop. Most of the fables has been attributed to Aesop, who was said to and have been in Greek slave. They say he was ugly, but cunning and clever. His skill in making fables gained him his freedom from slavery and even won a high position in government. Aesop's fables were first printed in English by William Caxton in 1484. From his own translation made from the French, Aesop fables were not believed to have been written as children's literature, and the Book of Fables was originally used to make finely disguised social and political criticism. The similarity to parables or allegories can be seen in most of the short tales in Aesop's Book of Fables. One of example of story One of example of Aesop's story is the Hare and the Tortoise. It tells the story of a race between a tortoise, a creature that moves very slowly, and a hare, a creature that can run very fast. The hare is very confident of winning, so it stops during the race and falls asleep. The tortoise continues to move very slowly but without stopping, and finally it wins the race. The moral of this tale is slow and steady wins the race. Next slide, please. The next one is the Jatakas. Another Asian collection of India fables is the Jatakas. When they originated, it was not known, and Jataka is a Buddhist name for stories concerning the rebirth of Gautama Buddha, who according to tradition was reincarnated many times in the forms of many different animals until he became at last, which is the Buddha the Enlightened. Part of the canon of sacred Buddhist literature, this collection of some 550 anecdotes and fables depicts earlier incarnations, sometimes as an animal, sometimes as a human, of the being who would become Siddhartha Gautama, the future Buddha. Traditional birth and death dates of Gautama are 563 to 483 BC. The Jataka tales are dated between 300 BC and 400 AD. One of the Jataka's tales is the future Buddha as a wise judge. This is the story that is similar about wise King Solomon in the Bible, if you are familiar with that story. King Solomon judged that two women want a baby should cut it in half. He knows that the real mother won't let the baby die. In the Jataka story, one woman wants to eat another woman's baby. The wise judge Buddha steps in and deals with the situation and doesn't let the baby die. It just shows that don't make a sudden decision and don't judge easily but judge wisely. Next slide, please. And the last one the sources of fables is the La Fontaine. Another name associated with fable is Jean de La Fontaine, a Frenchman who turned many of the fables of Aesop into verses. Jean de La Fontaine was a French poet, French and fabulist who lived and worked during the 17th century. For special contribution to French literature, he was elected to the French Academy of Sciences in 1684. Published in 1668, the collection of fables brought La Fontaine international fame. The works of the ancient Greeks, Indians, Indian storytellers, other fabulists, and folk tales about animals serves as a source of inspiration for the author. Drawing motifs for these works, La Fontaine brings new life to the fable genre, and one of his fables is the grasshopper and the ant. The fable describes how a hungry grasshopper begs for food from an ant when winter comes and is refused. The situation sums up moral lessons about the virtues of hard work and planning for the future. The story of the grasshopper and the ant teaches us it is important to use your time well and add meaning to your life. If you spend your time productively, you will always find some extra time to pursue your hobbies. You should always spend your time in a constructive manner. Next slide, please. Characters of fables. There are 8 characters in fables. First is characters of the story are usually animals. As can be seen, the characters in fables are not always human, but they are always animals or animator objects. Second, second is animals are made to think, act, and talk like human beings. The animals in the stories are made to act, speak, and think in the same way that humans do, not usually the actual animals that make a sound only. Third is, as you can see when you read some fable stories, the moral lesson of the story is usually at the end. It is not in the beginning because, as I mentioned earlier, the moral lesson of the story is always in the end. Next is, the story is usually short. It is unusual if you see a fable story that is contain 1,500 words or in above. Next one is, animals personify human beings. Usually, the animals in the story personify us on how we think, how we act, and how we talk. Next one is, the fable is full of actions and conversations. Fable is full of humor and funny situations. And lastly, some of the fables have tragic and dramatic series of events. And it's not always a happy ending, or sometimes it's not made you satisfied at the ending. Next slide, please. Here are the 8 values of fables. The first one is they give delight and enjoyment to both children and adults. Second is they teach ethical in an attractive manner or form. The next one is they provide background for the understanding of many new or current expressions and allusions. The fourth one is some of the fables serve as a guide to good conduct on the child's level of expressions. The fifth is children enjoy the fables because of the prominent part played by animals. Next one is they touch moral and spiritual sense of values. And the seventh is they cultivate thinking and imagination. And lastly, they are good for storytelling and dramatization purposes. And that would be my part. Thank you. And the next presenter will be Miss Salabarria.
So, good day everyone. To continue our topic, my topic is all about epic. Next slide, please. Epic is a long narrative poem dignify the style about the deeds, traditional or historical heroes or heroes. So epic is a long book or a narrative verse formed with the heroic journey of a single person or a group of person. Elements that typically distinguish an epics include the superhuman deeds, fabulous adventure, and relical dramatic tradition. Epic is a lengthy, extraordinary deeds. It gives the moral of the universe for their descendants. When we say extraordinary, it is very remarkable. The story revolves the main character or the greatness or the adventurous in the story. In literary usage, composes both in oral or in written. So in epic, we can use it oral or written literature. Next slide, please. So I have here the example of epic. In Filipino, this is lamang. So I think we are familiar with this epic story. It is notable for being the first Philippine folk epic recorded. Written form was in the only folk epic documents during the Philippine Spanish period. The story of Lamang revolves the amazing strength of him. Kagaya ng sinabi ko, ang epic is greatness ng main character. So it's all about how he see his father. Um, After a month of waiting, he decided to find it, but unfortunately, he dreamed about his father is already dead. And why we seeks and avengers, the person killed and a further, it is only become he is the only one in the witness of these descendants. The greatness of Lamang is the prehistoric poem in the um, Ilocano people in the Philippines. The story was held down already the greatness before it written. It is around in 1640. Assumably by build in Ilocano, Pedro Bacunang. Next slide, please. So I have here the five classical examples of epic. So the first one, the Odyssey by Homer. An epic, it already have a 24 books. Kagaya nga ng nauna, ito yung mga salin-salin na kaya naging 24 books. It's only a tribute of a Greek poet, Homer. The poem is all about the Odyssey, the king of Attica, who wonders the 10 years of trying to get her father Trojan before the war. It is the return of Odyssey, but her father is the only one who recognized him and her dog and her nurse. With the help of her son, Telemachus, Odyssey destroyed the instant of the future of peoples and the several maids of fraternities to the suitor of remarkable strength of the story. He only reestablished himself and the kingdom. The second one is the Aeneid by Virgil. So this an epic poem composed of somewhere between 29 and 19 BC. It talks about the Trojan named um, the name Homer. It also traveled and belonged to the Italy. It became a further of Roman. So parang continuation to siya ng the Odyssey. Connected sila bilang an classical epic poem. Next slide, please. The third one is the Civil War. So the Civil War is a pre-iconic civil war between Pompey and Caesar in between 48 BC, which is composed of the Roman dramatic um, republic, in which birth in Roman Empire. The fourth one is the the rape of Black by Alexander the Pope. So this is a poem also, a mock poem that strategize or emphasize the upper class of London time. The story focused on a certain character named Belinda, whose he cut his hair in a social media gathering. All through this vital most, Belinda outcast that her lack of hairs been by Boron. It includes mock epic, so parang somehow comedy yung ano yung epic na to. The fifth one is the Paradise Lost by John Milton. It was a very great epic for me because it includes the recreates of a biblical story for a fandom of starting the evolution of Adam and Eve. The first fall, and it all about revolves the revel of angels in heaven. So that concludes with the classical epic. Next slide, please. Types of epics in literature. So we have to consider two types. It is oral or in a written. So in oral, ito yung sinasabi kanina ng mga salin-salin na istorya na pwedeng myths or epic. So there are two main types, folk epic and created developed through the tradition. Like what I said, it literary epic story attributed in a single defended author. Next slide, please. Characteristic of epic. Somehow, medyo similar to siya sa myths kasi parang mga ganun din mahahabang story. It includes with the goddess, ganito, ganyan. And ito yung mga tatandaan lang natin specifically pag mag-identify tayo ng epic. It includes the heroic, outstanding, large settings, an action of human deeds, or a great valor requiring superhuman courage, katapangan, mga journey, adventures. It involves the force of gods, angel, demons insert of themselves in action. It is written in a very special style, which is pwedeng maging prose or epic simile. Kaya mahirap din talaga intindihin yung epic literature. Next slide, please. The difference between epic and the other types of traditional literature. Like what I've said, very similar lang talaga sila lahat. May mga kanya-kanya lang silang characteristic na pwede nating ma-identify. So, the difference between these two is the gap. However, some written believes in a modern literature based on a foundation of classical literature which make more impactful. Next slide, please. The last one is the importance of epic in literature. They tell us about the happenings of spread cultures. Epics are the proof of culture that they tells about the history and recognizing of the milestones of our ancestor. So I think it would be the importance of epics. Ito yung mga kinikwento sa atin ng mga dati pa nating ninuno na kung paano natin mabibigyan ng halaga yung mga natitirang kultura or paano natin din maisasabuhay yung bibigyang pahalaga yung mga natitirang mga pagsasalin ng mga kwento ng which is epic or if it's myths. So that concludes my report. The next reporter is Ms. Rica May Raymara. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Salavaria. So let's talk about folktales. So next slide please. So what is folktales? So the term folktales refer to a traditional narrative or of unknown authorship that has been handed down from generation to generation regardless of its content. So a folktale is a folklore genre that typically consists of a story passed down from generation to generation orally. Maybe some of you experienced when we were small, We often heard some stories from our grandparents and parents before uh, we went to bed. So next is origin of folktales. So the first that all folktales originated in India, in the sacred books of Buddhism, and were transmitted by migration of people by crusaders and Hebrew gypsies or Romani person. Second is that many of the tales arose independently among people widely separated geographically and historically. This proves that human experience, human nature, and human emotion are universal. So there was no specific person who started folktales. We as humans are good storytellers, and before there was no technologies to share, to post to any social media about stories. So people used to tell stories orally. So the next is next slide po. Primary characteristics of folktales. First is has no known individual author. So there was no author of folktales because, like what I said, they were passed down generation by generation. So second is has no fixed or original form. And because there was no specific author of folktales, we are free to change the plot of the story, but not necessarily all. Third has a brief introduction because mostly children will listen to the story and they have a short span of attention, a brief but concise introduction. So fourth is adapted to any age. We should consider the story that everyone can relate, especially the children. So five is has a simple plot that is easy to remember. It should be simple because most of the listeners are children. So if the story has a long plot, they will probably forget it. It should be a simple and memorable story. So number six is characters appeal to both children and adults. So the importance of the story is the characters, that the characters are adaptable or appealing and both children or even adults will look them as a superhero or favorite characters. Number seven is has element of magic that appeals to children. So it has something that children will look for the story or the title because it's something they can relate or want to be when they grow up, or they will look as their inspirations. You know, if the story is very interesting, the children will never forget that until they were old. So next slide po. So next is values of folktales. First is gives pleasure and enjoyment to children. That's explainable. And second is steers the imagination because some of the characters of folktales, for example, fairies, the animals who are talking. So number three is gives insight into life. Stories that address a number of real life issues that children may have encountered while growing up. So number four is used for dramatization. Children to imitate the story that they adore. So five is used for illustration. Visual explanations like pictures have a huge impact on children, especially if they were colorful. So number six is develops ear training. So because children love to listen stories, they attentively listen to what the storyteller is telling about the story. So number seven is plays a role in the emotional development of children. Characters in the story have a hugely significant role in the story. For example, the ending of the story is sad, happy, or disappointed. The children will also feel what the story delivers to them. So number eight is develops confidence and courage in children against fear of the unknown. So if the characters play a superhero or have a lesson for the children regarding what they fear, that fear will eventually go away and they will remember that character that inspired them. So next po, types of folktales. So number one is cumulative or repetition. It's the simplest type of tale. It has simple plot and rhythmical pattern. Its episodes follow each other neatly and logically in a pattern of cadence repetition. So second is telling these stories. Are stories in which the animals talk. The animals not only talk with other animals but with human beings. The animal's tale generally teaches a lesson, course, age, integrity, and self-reliance. Rewards are stressed in the outcome of the tales, but they are never moralistic. So number three is droll or humorous stories are about sillies and numbskulls. They are meant for fun and nonsense. So number four is myths is a story that explains primitive man's idea of the origin of the universe, the mysteries of natural phenomena, the life of gods and goddesses and other pagan divinities, their contact with each other, and their relation to man. So number five is epics and hero tales. Is a story that is something written in verse, sometimes in prose, and others are in ballads. The stories may be exploits of a hero and his heroic acts embody the moral code of a country or a nation. So number six is legends is an old story containing wonders and miracles that was handed down without any foundation in history but popularly believed to be true. Every country has its own legend which was patterned in their own custom and tradition. It could be a story that tells the origin of a place, thing, or person. Number seven is fables. Is a fictitious story about an animal or an inanimate object which behaves like a human being and has dominate trait. It is meant to teach a lesson or moral. Number eight is fairy tales. The term tales include a wide variety of folk tales. A large proportions of these stories are based on the element of magic or supernatural. Something extraordinary happens in the story. Number nine is religious tales. So folk tales using religious elements or belief are rarely found in children's collection. The religious folk tales are either comical or didactic. They were patterned after the morality plays of the Middle Ages. So number 10 is Roman tale is remote and impersonal. The characters are stereotypes, enchantments, and impossible tasks separate folktales lovers and magic brings them together as in. So number 11 is realistic stories are improbable but possible. So next please. So these are some famous stories in different nationalities. So number one is A Gift from Saint Nicholas, which is from in American. So in Arabian, the famous Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. In letter C, which is in East Indian, the famous The Tiger and the Brahmin and the Jackal. So in English, Jack and the Beanstalk. So in French, of course, we all know that Cinderella. So next po, uh, in German, the elves and the shoemaker. In Greeks, Aesop's fables. In Norse, Boots and his brothers. So in Russian, the straw ox. So next po. So desirable uses of folktales. So number one is for entertainment. Old folktales should be read for fun. They are also good for storytelling purposes. So number two is for illustration. Folktales characters are subjects for drawing, sketching, modeling, painting, and others. Number three is dramatization. Even in the nursery schools, children can play Three Little Pigs, Three Billy Goats, Gruff, and other tales. So, number four is for puppets. The characters in folk tales are suitable for hand puppets, sock puppets, and stick puppets. So, number five is the last one for storytelling. As storytelling is one activity that is best suited for young children, and the folk tales are excellent types of stories for telling. That would be all, and the next presenter is Miss Miana.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Rimar. Now let's proceed to the legendary heroes. So, what is the legendary heroes? It is an adjective that describes someone or something as legendary. They are very famous and many stories that told about them. So each of us had a different heroes in our lives. Maybe in our family or in our special someone, heroes who save us every time that we are really in need. And others, we had our national heroes who fought for our country, and we usually saw hero in maybe in a book or film or movie, or it is, has a good qualities and unique capabilities. Legend is a story of unknown origin describing plausible but extraordinary of past events or someone whose fame is specifically in enduring events. Next slide, please. So, what is the differences between legendary and heroes? A hero is a character, while the legend is a story that's something so extraordinary that they will never be forgotten. Let us say that everyone can be a hero for 5, 10, 15, or 20 minutes, or hour, a day, or month. But eventually, as time passed by, heroes are eventually forgotten. However, there are also heroes that we consider as a true hero, including our national heroes who died for our country. It is already written in our history. While legend is a story about human events or actions that has not been proved nor documented in real history. Next slide, please. So, what is the real purpose of heroes in our literature? Here is very important elements in literature and every stories because they are the one that provides main character who exhibits traits of goodness or upstanding morals. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of legendary hero here in our Philippines. First is the we all know about him, which is our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, the reformist writer Jose Rizal, were today generally considered the greatest Filipino hero and often given as the Philippine national hero as well. And the next is the Andres Bonifacio. De Castro was a Filipino Freemason and revolutionary leader on, or it is also called the father of revolutions and considered one of our national heroes of the Philippines. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, there are some types of heroes. So one, two, three, four, five. It has six types of heroes in literature. The first is the classical hero. So what is it? The classical heroes, sometimes known as romantic heroes, they are the normal people except that have a great talent. They often possess an attribute or quality that distinguishes them from ordinary people, making them a hero. Examples of classical heroes are Harry Potter, Pony Boy, or Victor Frankenstein. In Pony Boy, it is a 14-year-old Pony Boy Curtis is the youngest of three orphan brothers who live up a good relationship with his oldest brother Daryl. But since Daryl became the household caregiver, he is always upon his case. And next is the everyday hero. In literature, the term everyday hero has come to mean or an ordinary individual that the audience or reader easily identifies and with. Also, the everyday hero has no outstanding abilities or attributes. So, who are considered everyday heroes, especially today that we are in the midst of pandemic, including such as doctor, teachers, police officer, firefighter, nurse, stay-at-home mom, soldiers, farmer, everything was fighting or working every day in our lives. And the next is the superhero. Superhero is a benevolent, fictional character with superhuman powers, also an exceptionally skillful or successful person. Superheroes can start out as a classical heroes or even everyday heroes and be given a power that makes them superhuman. Example, one of the movie that it is very famous, the Avengers. Those are the Superman, the Thor, or Wolverine. The next is the tragic hero. It was the great philosopher Aristotle who first defined the ill-fated protagonist as a tragic hero or flawed hero. In William Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet or Romeo Montaigne, the male protagonist is an excellent example of a tragic hero. Romeo comes from a noble birth and has the tragic flaw of being impulsive and having a fair share of hubris in the stories of Romeo and Juliet. So according to Aristotle, there are six Aristotle's principles of a tragic hero. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, that was again as I mentioned earlier, that those are the types of those are the firefighter, nurses, doctors, teachers, our mom would be considered as a type of everyday heroes in our life. Next slide, please. Next, please. That's already done. Okay, that is the types of heroes in literature, which is the tragic hero. It was the greatest philosopher Aristotle who first defined the ill-fated protagonist as a tragic hero or flawed hero. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is according to Aristotle, there are six principles of a tragic hero, which is the hamartia, hubris, peripeia, anagoresis, nemesis, or catharsis. So a mercy of law that causes the downfall, and the hubris or hubris extreme pride, and peripeia reversal of fortune. Then the anagorizes when the hero makes a critical discovery, and the next is nemesis, a fate that cannot be reversed, and the next is the catharsis, soon pity or fear that the audience is left with after the hero's fall. Next slide, please. Okay, the next is the epic hero. The Greeks were the first to define the protagonist known as an epic hero. They are heroes of tragedy who evoke in the audience a sense of heroism and legendary awe-inspiring hero. Next slide, please. So, okay, there are seven characteristics of an epic hero. The first is the noble birth. It is an epic hero is usually a king, prince, demigod, or nobleman. For example, of noble birth, the Beowulf is an epic hero and the protagonist of the Old English poem Beowulf. Like many epic heroes, he is one of the noble birth. His uncle Hygelac is the king of the Geats as Beowulf ages and his crowned king himself. It becomes clear that he is a hero in the eyes of his countrymen. And the next is the superhuman strength or courage. This is the warrior has the potential for greatness based on their attributes. For example, the cunning, brave, humble, sagacious, and virtuous. And the next is the vast traveler. An epic hero is known for making travels to exotic locations by choice or chance, usually to battle against evil. And the next is the unmatched warrior skills. This hero typically has a reputation for being a great warrior. Epic heroes commonly have a status that precedes them prior to the beginning of the stories. And the next is the cultural legend. Before an epic hero can be universally accepted, they must first be a legend in their culture. And the next is the humility. This hero's greatest attribute is his humbleness, despite the fact that he may be the best of the best. He never brags, boasts, or becomes ostentatious about his abilities. And then last is the battles of supernatural force. Those are the nemesis of this hero is usually a supernatural being, for example, the Grendel and the Poseidon. Next slide, please. Okay, the last types of heroes in literature is the anti-hero. It is a central character who lacks conventional heroic attributes. Example, the anti-hero is the Lady Gatsby, Holden Caulfield, and Lady Macbeth. The central character of this anti-hero is in also anti-hero is a protagonist who lacks the hero qualities needed to be a hero. They are the most often not evil or immoral, but they do lack all the traits of traditional heroes such as bravery, nobility, and virtues. So next slide, please. So I think those are all the our part. There are some references that we use to find resources that we can get from. Yes, these are some references that we use. So, I think that's all in our group 6 about the legendary literatures. I hope you learned something from our group 6.
And thank you for participating. Goodbye and thank you.